And ladies and gentlemen, Chris Gearing.
Oh, jeez. Right, so, shouldn't start with so. This is really, I guess I'd like to think of it as a continuation of the talk I gave last year on Whamcloud and quality. I'm going to talk with Mike here, cover 4 areas, so really Whamcloud's view of quality, a look on what we've done since LUG last year, or at least some of the things we've done since LUG last year, and then a quick look at one of the things we're going to do in the year ahead, and then I'll hand over to Mike, who's going to talk about Maloo, which is really your window onto our test infrastructure and the whole environment that we have. So looking at Whamcloud's view of quality, I'm going to start actually by quoting Eric, who I don't think needs any introductions. And I was having coffee with Eric one morning, and he said during, I don't know what we were talking about, but I guess it was related to quality. He said, the only thing I'm non-linear about is Whamcloud not delivering what it says it will deliver. And the reason I picked up on this was because it really did crystallize for me why since Whamcloud's inception it's been so driven, Eric has driven so hard, and the whole organization's been driven so hard to become process focused and quality focused. And that's because the reality is that the only way you can deliver what you say you're going to deliver is to have the processes in place so you can meet your commitments. And it was just interesting to hear Eric, that the fundamental thing that was driving it was Eric's desire, and therefore Whamcloud's desire to always deliver what we say. And so, just kind of taking that a step further, I had this nice blue triangle last year and I've redrawn it. Generally, whenever you deliver something, it's kind of a mixture of features and performance, along with the time that you deliver it in, and stability. And as everyone knows, in many projects, and software projects in particular, you often lengthen the time or drop some features, or occasionally you will reduce the stability and quality of what you deliver. And the definition for me of quality, and the definition of what Whamcloud's trying to do, is that we commit up front to the triangle, we commit to the axes of the triangle, and then we deliver that, and we don't drop. We deliver the features and the performance and the time and the stability. And only if we do that, and we defined all those things up front, can we really say that we have a quality process that we're driving. So it's that kind of approach which is which stems from Eric and I'm sure others, but Eric's drive in particular to always be able to do what we say we'll do. So moving on again, and just to kind of reiterate that before I look at what we've done in the year past, we're still investing. We're investing a lot of money, time and expertise in creating tools and driving quality processes and generally getting ourselves up to scratch and constantly improving ourselves. We're continuing to develop tools and invest in infrastructure to enhance the Lustre community. And when I say that, all of the tools that we've created to date, everyone in this room, in fact, everyone on the planet really, can access by developing code, pushing it into the test system, into the review system and the build system, and gain access to those tools. So, nothing that I've been involved in building, in fact, I can't think, but nothing that's been built is purely for the use of Whamcloud. We're really doing it for the good of the community, and everyone has access to make use of those tools. And the whole of engineering team, last year I said is orientating itself, and this year it, I think, truly is orientated around quality principles. And I don't know how many people follow Jessica's blog even on the website, but she's blogged several times about the way that we use Scrum and Agile and mechanisms like that during our development process. So I think a year on, we're still at it because it's a never-ending story. But we have also we have got the basics definitely in place and running now, within our development environment. So that's where we are. That's our view on it. And let's just look at a year. This is kind of the year since last LUG, really. So landing test performance, the key thing really, or one of the big interactions, is when someone pushes code for landing. And what I'm talking about here is just the part from when you push the code and it goes in for review before it gets pushed into head. And for that, as far as testing is concerned, we've done about 687 days, I mean you can read it, but of landing testing, and that was 2,781 landing sessions, which is just over 2 million tests, and just over 2 million tests but slightly less of those passed. So the failure rate is quite small, but actually because for a session to complete, and a session is about 700 or so tests, only one of them needs to fail, so it's binary. Unless you get all 700, you failed. As far as sessions goes, it was actually 1,425 passes and 956 failures, which is about a 60% pass rate. So that's just to give you an idea of the sort of throughput just on the review front. And as Peter was saying, as soon as you push anything to actually gets pushed ahead, then that triggers another several days of testing actually. So this chart is basically just a graph of those landings, and as you can see, we have a basically by month since last year, and as you can see, we have a fairly convincing upward trend in the pass rate, tending towards 100%. And I would actually come back to this later, because there's some interesting attributes about this that aren't obvious. But we have a nice inclined line that shows we seem to be. It's probably a mixture of improvement of code that's being pushed and an improvement in our ability to repeatedly test code, to be honest, in that some of the earlier failures, and probably some today still, if I'm honest, are the test system rather than the code itself. But I think we're winning on most fronts on there. So the other thing that we wanted to do, this was pretty much how the world looked last year, in that lots of people, anyone can push code to the source code repository, and then Whamcloud was the only organization that then tested that code, and it's not scalable, and it doesn't allow us to do as much test as we want. So what we wanted to do, or the perfect situation, would be to do this, where lots of people test, lots of people write code, and the whole thing's just shared out. Except historically, prior to recent history, for want of a better term, you actually get something that's more like this, where lots of people do test, but everybody's test is different. People produce their results differently, and nobody's really, I guess you could almost say, confident in other people's testing. So a developer from organization X, is probably not confident when his code goes to Y, and he can't deal with it. So what we wanted to build was some test infrastructure that we could roll out to other places, or that other places could make use of, for the good of Lustre, for the good of the community, and then we really could have distributed test. And today, actually as we're running today, this is how we look. So we managed to achieve that, and we have testing running at Whamcloud, we have testing running at Juelich in Germany, and we have testing running at Indiana University in the US. And those results are the same, as in, of the same quality. It's a standardized test environment, I guess we have now, and the results are, without a doubt, a developer probably doesn't even take any notice of where the testing was carried out. So we can scale that testing up now. There's still work to be done, but we have actually achieved this today, which I think is a step forward. It enables more people to help in more ways, I think, is a good thing. So I just want to look at the two sites that did help us. So the Juelich Supercomputer Center, they financed very nicely a whole new cluster. They bought a whole bunch of kit in as a dedicated cluster that's just used for testing Lustre. It's been used for testing since it went live in about February. I think we got it up. It's been used for testing all head releases. It's quite nice for us because I say specializes, but from our perspective it does. In failover testing, it has 36 terabytes of multi-attached storage. It's quite small, but well equipped in terms of servers. It's fairly good for performance regression testing. It's not big enough to test the high end, but it's a completely private, dedicated cluster. So we hope, and we haven't done this yet, but there should be no contention of any sort on the network, so you'd hope that we'll get very good repeatability when it comes to performance regression testing. And we also, actually I'm not sure what we would have done. I would have found another solution, but we used it for manual large LUN testing for the 2.2 release, which was something that had to be done. And as I say, at the time, I don't think we had another solution. So I'd like to thank Juelich, and in particular Frank Hex, who's sat somewhere, for making this happen. And it's quite interesting on the first day of LUG that this whole thing came about because at the end of my presentation last time, Frank came up and said, "Oh, we'd like to help. Could we help with that?" And just, from being at LUG and that conversation, we then, we managed to get them to spend a whole bunch of money and come up with a cluster. So, the relationships and interaction that you have here really does lead to often tangible results. The second one was the University of Indiana. They've provided a 36-node cluster for the development and roll-up of what is kind of become a backup test system. We have been running it in parallel, but it was used for, we did some secondary 2.2 release testing on it. And the reason I used backup was that we, Whamcloud, had to move our test cluster from California. It's now gone to Boulder. And in order to do that, we swung the whole test environment over to well, where are you? Indiana. That's the place. That's the one. To Indiana, and we actually did it. I'd bet a beer that anyone can't go back and look at the test results and look at the output from Maloo and tell us when we did it, because actually it was. I'm quite chuffed how seamless it was. We actually got them running up in parallel. We had the results coming out of both, and then we just flicked the switch, so we started taking the results from Indiana rather than ourselves. And touch wood, either this Friday or next Monday we're going to flick the switch back, so maybe we can do it twice. And again, I'd like to thank Indiana and Steve for helping set that up, because both of those have one has helped a lot with distributing the test load, but also has enabled us to develop. And Juelich actually were the first people where we ran it on another site, so they experienced some of the teething problems. So that was kind of two of the key things that we've done. We got the distributed test out, and the first one, and we did quite a lot of testing, which with ever improving results, which was good to see. I was quite pleased when I plotted that graph and didn't have to hack the data about to get it to go upwards. But it was real data. It was. I didn't change it at all. So going back to that graph, which I didn't hack, there is a question on it, because at the moment what happens is that during development, developers push code into the landing process which isn't ready to land, and they know it's not ready to land, and it fails because they're debugging something. They want some debug. And so many of the failures on this may actually not be real failures, because actually they expected it to fail, they wanted it to fail, they were trying to reproduce an issue. And you could say that many of the passes aren't real passes because they were trying to reproduce the issue that they couldn't find. So I'm sure the data's good, but one thing we would like to know, and for some very good reasons, is to really know what we're seeing here. So what we're going to create is two distinct paths for development testing when you're doing development, and for landing testing when you're doing development. There'll be similar processes. In fact, they'll be almost identical. But up front, when you do the push, you're going to have to kind of state your intention. And one thing is you won't be able to push it, and if it passes, say, "Oh, that was a landing," because you'll have already stated it was just development test. And there'll be some good things, as well as us knowing better what's going on and how good the code is that's really being landed. It will actually mean that when people are pushing for development, we can be as flexible as they want on that testing. So if they want to just run one test, or they want to run a particular distribution, or anything they want, as much as we can allow flexibility, we're going to let them say, I want to just test this today. And what we hope is as well as knowing what's going on and actually getting some efficiency, is that we encourage systematic tests to be part of the process. There's too much testing at the end, and we want to get people testing, want to make it easy to test really, really, really early. Earlier than early. Because whilst people say, and it's true, if you test at the end, then you can't test quality in. There's no doubt that if you can drive your development by test, then you can lift the quality. So test during development does improve the quality, without a doubt. And another thing, because we're going to do the same process, I hope, and and this is all about, we're building the tools, so when we're going to encourage people to use them, that we can encourage peer review as the code is written. And I often didn't do anything, did it? Oh, I did. Right. So when I look at the reviews sometimes, as and I wander through, you do see people say things like, well, it works. I wouldn't have done it that way, but somebody spent 3 weeks writing it 3 months. You're not going to say undo it all just because it's not the best possible way. So if we can get reviews to happen earlier, then we can lead to better code. Because instead of people having to say, that's not how I would have done it, if people can be pushing code for review that's really an outline of code where they haven't finished it, then people can say, that's not the way I'll do it. Have you thought of doing it like this? And the difference between saying, have you thought of doing it like this, rather than I wouldn't have done it like that, is really an opportunity for education. And with the distributed environment that we have, I think creating opportunities for people to educate others, to pass on their wisdom and knowledge is really useful. So hopefully by bringing testing and review forward, we can really lead to better code. So lastly, be auditable. I always think it sounds a bit austere, that, but really, one thing, as I say, that we'd like to know is how we're performing, how we've performed in the past. So if we're sure that all of this testing that's done by developers is captured, it'll all be captured against the ticket for the bug. So if you look at or improvement, but if you look at a ticket, you'll be able to see when they did testing of development, when they got good results, when they decided to push it. Then we can mine that data and work out how to improve the way that we're all working, and have better working practices and better tools and all that sort of stuff. And so, as I say, the other thing we'll do is that the development test, the testing that's carried out in development, will also be part of the landing collateral. So if we can get this testing culture and bring it forward, then in the review process, people can say, well, they can ask about what testing did you do? I can't see any early, and it'll just it just encourages what is without doubt, and I don't think anyone would disagree, is a better way of working. And then finally, if we do separate development from or when we separate development from landing, we really should be able to get a 100% pass rate for landing, because it should be the case that there's no excuse for someone to push code that they haven't thoroughly tested, because we're going to give them all the tools, and therefore, if you push it and it fails the landing test, then there's a good question to be asked, and we'll work out. It sounds very austere, but it is true, and we can work out, was it a tools failure, was it an approach? But we can start to work towards that. That philosophy that what goes in for landing should already be good code. It's not, the landing process isn't part of the code improvement process. You improve it beforehand and then you land it. So I have a rather Disney-esque, overdid the animations a bit thing here. So I just wanted to kind of reiterate that. So we have our developer, and he's pulling code from Jira as today. But what would be really cool would be if the first thing that he did, or she did, was to run it against the test system, because there's a good case here. If we have a bug and we run it against the test system, the test system should fail. So first of all, you can say if the test system doesn't fail, then this developer should seek out either to raise a ticket to improve the test system, or hopefully write the appropriate test to capture the bug that we're trying to fix, or to illustrate the need for the improvement that we're trying to make. So so then he carries on and does his development, and what we really want is just a constant that testing. It's very easy to carry out tests. People write some code, they write some unit tests because they haven't now finished, so they're thinking about a much more detailed level of the code, and they're testing that as they're running along. So we're gonna end up with better test scripts because of it. And then finally, as I said before they push the code to Gerrit for final review, they should be able to test solid code that should give solid results. And they can do this as a development test, and then once they know it's all good, they can then push to the Gerrit process to carry out the review that we happens today. And as I say, by that there should be no no need or no excuse for pushing for pushing code that really isn't solid and I'll say it, fit for purpose. So just quickly, I hope that next year, and because I'm a realist, I've got some failures in our landing results, but that by next year we can be looking at 100% or near 100% for landing results, because we've put everything in place to make that possible. On the development test, I'm not even sure whether anyone knows whether failing or passing is good, because that's in the eye of the developer, and who knows? Maybe they wanted it to fail, maybe they didn't. But with that, I will hand over to Mike, because I'm eating into his time, and I'll let Mike talk to you about Maloo, which is your window onto this environment that we've made. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So I'm going to give a quick overview of Maloo for the next few minutes. As Chris said, it's a window into our test system. First, I'm going to give a high-level view of what Maloo is. Then I'll talk about some of the changes which have been made to Maloo since last log. Time's short, so it's only a quick selection of the high points. Then I'll talk about the priorities which guide the development of Maloo itself. They center on the quality of Maloo and its ability to give developers access to timely and accurate data. And finally, if time permits, I'll talk about a couple of features that are planned for Maloo. Again, it's a sampling of the more interesting opportunities. There are just so many on my to-do list. The ones I've picked are user preferences and some automation around scanning log files. So what is Maloo? Well, Maloo gives you a window into our test system, and its main focus is the results that are generated by the auto test system. We'll see later that it also offers visibility into different areas of the test system. It's a web application which collects data from test systems and makes those available, both the results and the log files, to the developers. Developers can download a script from the Maloo site to be able to automatically push up their results and have them included in the data in Maloo. Maloo's open to the public. There's a very simple sign-up at maloo.whamcloud.com. The data Maloo collects has two parts. There's a set of YAML files which describe the test results and also describe the configuration of the nodes that the tests were run on. And then the second part of the data are the log files, both from node provisioning and from the actual test runs themselves. The YAML files, which describe the test results, pretty much just get slurped into the database, and we throw those away once we process them. But the log files from the node provisioning and the tests, all those are stored in Maloo, and we've got about 1 terabyte of log files stashed away in Maloo from all the tests that it's collected. And that allows us to do some kind of retrospective investigation, or lets a developer pull down results from a year ago, or the logs from a year ago. And it's pretty easy to drill down from the front page into any particular result with a few mouse clicks. You're on the log files. Now I'll move on to a couple of the more visible recent changes to Maloo. There have been lots of other changes, visible and otherwise, and as I said before, there's lots of stuff on my to-do list. The reports we'll see make use of the data from Maloo, both from test results and other areas of the test system, to give us a better sense of how testing is going, both in terms of lustre quality and in terms of how well we're using the test resources. This slide shows a portion of a release report, and this report, Peter uses it, is used to get a sense of the quality as measured by test set passes of a particular branch of the Lustre release tree. It combines test data from Maloo and revision data from the Git repository to allow the release manager to see if the release's quality is improving, and to drill down to the test results or to the Jira issues very quickly. Looking at the column headers, we see Git tags, part of the SHA-1 for the Git commit, the date it was committed, and then down the side we see the names of the tests, and they're just sorted alphabetically. Each cell in the table contains a summary of all the test runs for which that particular revision participated, in which it participated. If the cell is green, it means that all the tests passed, and that's pretty marvelous. If the cell's red, then it means there are a higher proportion of errors than there were in the previous run, so things are getting worse. This is probably a bad sign if you're getting towards a release. And the cells that are amber show that there are still some failures in the tests, but the proportion is less than in the last run, so hopefully things are tracking towards becoming green again. You'll notice there are a few white cells on there. Those are, for some revisions, that particular test wasn't run. Maybe there were commits soon afterwards, and that test never got run for that revision. So this report lets the release manager quite quickly get an idea of whether things are getting better or worse in a sort of general qualitative way, and he can drill down into the data behind that. This slide shows a relatively new report which we're using to get a better idea of how effectively we're using our test cluster resource. The more effectively we use the resource, the more tests we can run, and also the faster developers are likely to get visibility of their results in Maloo. Time goes from sort of left to right across the top. The most recent history is on the right, the oldest stuff is on the left, and each little bar is a particular individual node. When a node's actually got some results in Maloo, I colour the area green to show that we were actually getting useful results at that time for that node. And the white areas are either where Maloo has no data because we weren't running tests, or perhaps because a developer had reserved those nodes for some development and we just don't have the results for that. When your mouse is over a particular node at a particular time, it and all the other nodes that were involved in the test get highlighted red, and you can click on it and go and look at the results for that particular test set. If you look at this graph, you can see there are sort of two distinct classes of nodes. Up at the top, there's Whamcloud's Toro cluster, where we typically use 4 nodes at a time in a test set to run tests. And then at the bottom is Livermore's Hyperion cluster, where we use hundreds of nodes at a time, so you get much fatter green bars. So this conveys a lot of information about how well we're using the test resource at a glance, once you know what it's showing, and it lets us see whether improvements we're making actually improve the utilization. I have made some internal changes to Maloo which aren't particularly visible to users. The ones that probably have the most effect for the users are the fact that we have properly tested it, packaged it, and automated its deployment, which means that any deployments I make are very unlikely to break Maloo. There's still plenty of opportunity for internal work, but let's move on to my development priorities. It shouldn't really be a surprise, given Chris's introduction, that quality is the main rationale behind my development priorities. A measure of the quality of a tool is its fitness for purpose. I mentioned that I have some practices that make sure I don't break it when I deploy it, and the value for a developer is that it gives access to the test results as quickly as possible from when the test finishes, and apart from that, it stays out of the developer's way. If the results don't show up in Maloo as expected, then the developer needs visibility into the tool to see if it's in some queue awaiting processing, or there's some other explicable delay, and if it's not there, then he can come and ask me or Chris, what's up? The tool should be easy to use and responsive, so it doesn't interrupt the developer's flow, and the usability and user experience have been improved, but there's still a lot of work to be done on that. The other quality is the sort of quality of the data in Maloo. It's got to be accurate, it's got to be produced on a timely basis, and it's got to be accessible. There's no point in having it if you developers can't see it. Now I'll very quickly go on to a couple of new features, because I know I've got a minute left. The first one is log file scanning. At the moment we just stash the test results in the database and don't do anything with them, and we just assume the pass or fail count in the YAML files is correct. It would be possible for Maloo to actually look through the log files as it stashes them for important phrases like error and failure and segmentation fault, and flag those result sets on the front page. And it might look something like this, where we're looking at the test results, and here we have a little footprint saying, hey, I discovered something in the logs. The developer can click once on one of those feet and gets the test sets which contain the failure. Again, we have little footprints that sort of lead them to the actual tests that had interesting log files. They click on that, and you get to the particular test, and it even identifies which particular log you want to go and look at, because some tests can have hundreds of logs from all the clients. And so clicking on that, you get taken right to the line in the log file that had something interesting on it. So with 3 or 4 mouse clicks, you can see if it's something you didn't know about or not. And the final new feature is user profiles. There's a lot of information in Maloo. Different people want to view it differently. We make you sign up, so why don't we let you hide some columns, shuffle orders around, have a different landing page, that kind of thing. Again, those are just 2 of the more interesting looking improvements I have planned. There are loads more, and if you want to ask me or Chris about our longer term plans, then feel free to collar us. You can read that. It's what I just said. And I'd like to say thanks very much for your sort of time and patience.
Any questions?